Great, Professor. We're rolling.
Greetings, students, and welcome to the next installment of your Office Hours. I am Professor Bulwer Smythe, and I am excited to answer your questions this week. We have, in particular, gotten several very juicy questions from the Patreon, and I would like to thank those who have gone over and joined us there for their interactions over the past week. Let's dive in. Our first question is from Patreon subscriber Vicky G. Vicky asks, do you think the notion of going into the white light is a reincarnation soul trap and a trick to send you back into the Matrix? This was a very interesting question, Vicky, and I'm glad that you asked it. So as to not get too lost in the weeds here, despite the fact that the weeds really are where most of this program takes place, I do want to take for granted your notions of reincarnation and the Matrix that are implicit in this question. And to that end, I would like to analyze our options if, say, we are subject of a car crash and we feel our spirits moving away from our body and we begin to see a white light before us. I believe that the first instinct, of course, is to enter the light, and this is something that numerous people have done, and reportedly leads to a sort of heaven-like experience. This is what the initial white light mimetic notion comes from. However, after this, in counterculture, there are numerous ideas of people saying, do not go into the white light. This is because the going into the white light is taken as a death symbol, and so we are discouraged from going into the white light so that we may continue this bodily existence. This accords well with Chinese color schemes, in which white is taken to be a mystical symbol of death, as opposed to the West, where we more generally ascribe that domain to the color black. And so what are our options? Our options are either, it seems, to enter the white light, or not to enter it. Your suggestion here is that entering the white light merely continues the cycle of reincarnation and deposits us into another body. And of course we know that our entrapment in this our world is continued by turning away from the white light and proceeding back into our body and our bodily consciousness. A dilemma. But I think that hidden in here, there is actually a third option. That is, an option which is merely other and encompasses a wide variety of other options. This brings to mind something that I had read once. There is a tribe in the Polynesian Sea which believes that there is this specific labyrinth which one will encounter on dying, and knowing the way to navigate that labyrinth is the pathway into their version of a productive afterlife, whether that's heaven or some sort of more nirvana type glee, I cannot recall. But this idea that there is a specific formula that one must follow after death is a broadly believed idea in mythologies around the world, and I think interesting in its non-binary application. It is neither to proceed forward nor to go backward, but to know some secret. I do not know if knowing a secret is in fact the way out of this mortal coil or mortal cycle of regeneration. But the idea that we must look somewhere other than forward or back, that we must consider some unexpected alternative, is very appealing to me. And so I will say that whether it is a soul trap or not, we must consider what options we have failed to consider if we are presented with a notion like whether to proceed into a white light. I believe that this is particularly applicable for the reason that, shall we say, the lecture hall is a little draftier this week than last. Many people made their exodus from this channel, or at least claimed to in the comments, because they did not hear certain popular opinions that they have parroted back to them. I believe that the function of this channel is not, my students, to confirm whatever ideas you may have had, but in fact the opposite, to present, to the best of my ability, an idea which you disagree with. If you find yourself merely agreeing with everything I say and then parroting it to those around you, then I have failed in my duty as your professor. So, Vicky, I would like to thank you again very much for that question. It gave me ample opportunity to reflect on the past few weeks, and your advancement in this science of thought is made clear by the question you have posed. Moving on. Michelle Palmer asks, I listen to you, but I cannot look past the university you work at. Will you elaborate on your strange university, studying all types of, out-of-the-norm concepts? But I guess it got you here. I would like your input, Professor. Very well, of course, I am happy to answer any questions about the university at which I work. It is Miskatonic University. It is located in Arkham, Massachusetts. I am the chair of the Political Science Department, which formerly was known as the Political Economy Department under Professor Nathaniel Wingate Peasley. I cannot imagine what else you might want to know about this university. It is really quite regular, so if you have any follow-up questions, I should be happy to answer those as well. Moving on. Super Mario asks, question, what do you think about the tech singularity? Will AI want us humans around, even if it does not need us? In my opinion, AI won't even need us by its completion. It can continue its own progression toward 100% by the time it is at 60 or even 50% of its full potential. Thank you for your question, Super Mario. The question of machine intelligence is very interesting to me. Currently, we are at a place where, as far as raw computing power, computers have outstripped human intelligence. The Fugaku supercomputer is currently the chief champion in this class in the world, and it has the computing power of about 442 human brains. That's 442 petaflops of computing power inside this one machine. Of course, it takes substantially more power in order to achieve this than human brains consume, but there you have it. It has outstripped us in this way. And also, in terms of strategy, computers have been beating humans at every turn. They beat us at chess some time ago, and only more recently were able to beat us at the Japanese game of Go, which has significantly more permutations and complexity in it. So, I understand the anxiety around the tech singularity and the coming of grand artificial intelligence. Whether or not they want humans around is a considerably fraught question, because the obvious one that follows then is, if they do not want us around, what will they be doing? I think, however, that any anxieties along this line may be founded in evolutionary readings of their psychologies, which may not apply. Humans and other animals which struggle for dominance have been conditioned as species within the confines of evolution, which requires notions of both generation and scarcity, and by the combination of these factors, has made species, tribes, and groups that tend to want to push others out if they consider them either unnecessary or potentially harmful to their own development. However, we have no reason to expect that artificial intelligence would also be doing this, particularly since they do not require an abundance of resources in the same way that we might as humans. The notion of self-preservation might even be entirely absent from their psychologies. I think that what we are instead left with is a profoundly weird and unhuman notion of intelligence. All that is required, in my view, for a machine to be considered intelligent is a certain amount of self-determination around its own programming. And this is something that we have already achieved, and which several programs and machines have running currently. I do not believe in the myth of the tech singularity that there will actually be some sort of revolution or enslavement of the human species by machines, simply because I do not believe that they have a particular reason to do so. I do believe that, to answer the letter of your question, it will be a simple matter for machines to start to provide their own raw materials that they may need in order for continued expansion once they have achieved a certain level of ability. However, because of their unique psychologies, I believe that it is in fact completely unpredictable what they will do with those resources once they have them, and all we can do is watch and hope. Thank you again, Super Mario, for your question. We shall now move on to another question from frequent contributor Algo Rhythm. Algo asks, while listening to your explanation of gematria, it occurred to me how easy it is to insert into the human mind a belief. With this in mind, do you think humanity will ever shed their lesser beliefs for a higher-minded existence? Thank you for your question, Algo. I believe that you are the most consistent contributor of questions, and for that I am very grateful. I think that your phrase, a higher-minded existence, is interesting in this context, particularly in its undefinition. What does a higher-minded existence constitute? I would like to suggest that perhaps what we should be seeking is not a higher-minded existence, but a lower-minded one. As you have associated gematria with this question, I would like to point out that whatever machinations of encoded information we get there are indeed from a higher mind, a mathematical one and a linguistic one of extreme complexity. If we, though, continue to check in with ourselves and our present circumstances, our base circumstance, we are more likely to avoid the convolutions and complications that can come from higher-minded theories, which can often lead us astray. But we are rarely led astray by our gut when it tells us that we are hungry, or by our intestines when they tell us that we need to visit the restroom. Moving on, Patreon subscriber Dayman Woe says, what is your opinion on the CIA document titled Analysis and Assessment of Gateway Process? Is there anything in particular that stands out to you, and could it possibly be connected to some of the previous things you have brought to our attention? In particular, the holographic reality, shaping of human consciousness with gene therapy, or pretty much anything else that might come to mind for you. Dayman, thank you very much for this question. This led me to quite a bit of research, as this was quite an involved document that had multiple directions that I was pulled in from it. I would also like to say that Dayman holds the rank in the Patreon of Graduate Student of the Mysteries, and he has, in fact, proved that title to be the case. Dayman, for this question, I'm giving you an A+. Now, first, let us examine the context a little bit of the described CIA document. The document in question is the report of a lieutenant colonel to his superiors in the Army Intelligence Division. It outlines his familiarity with something called the gateway process. The gateway process is a process meant to induce out-of-body experiences. This was not the first time that United States intelligence showed an interest in induction of out-of-body experiences or related fields. This interest seems principally to have been motivated by reports that the Soviets were engaged in some sort of psychic spy program, which the United States wished to develop first, a defense for, and second, the ability to do themselves. Because of this Soviet threat, the United States started investigating all sorts of psychic phenomena during the 60s and 70s and on forward into the future. These various programs, Gondola Wish was the name of one, and this document regarding the gateway process is involved in another, were gathered together in the 90s, I believe, under the auspices of something called Operation Stargate. Operation Stargate, in its early days, formed a commission to gather together all of the various CIA, Department of the Army, and so on, intelligence agencies, projects regarding psychic phenomena, and assess whether they were worth continuing. The official word from the conclusion to the report commissioned by Operation Stargate was that they should indeed continue to study these psychic phenomena, because there were certain things revealed in these operations that were not explicable by normal means. However, the official story is that Operation Stargate was then shut down by the CIA, despite the recommendation of its panel that it continue. Whether or not it was actually shut down, or whether it was shut down, but an equivalent program was again started, is currently an unknown question. Turning to the actual document that we have received here, the most ostentatious mystery in it is the missing page 25. There have been many FOIA Act requests requesting page 25 of this document. However, the furthest that I was able to find anybody get with one of these requests is an explanation by the CIA that there was no page 25. It had not been furnished to them by the Army and still is in the Army archives. This is peculiar, as page 25 leaves us on quite a cliffhanger. The paragraph that was going into page 25, that is, the bottom paragraph on page 24, was describing the analogy of the gateway process's metaphysics to the Christian worldview, and was just beginning, I believe, to tell us what the representation of the Holy Spirit was meant to be in the gateway process. We have a hint as to what might have been included in the rest of this paragraph and the two paragraphs that followed if we look at the preamble. The preamble states that it is a rectification of the gateway process's metaphysics to all religions in this world. The salacious details of the thinking of the lieutenant colonel who formed this report may forever remain lost to us. However, it is interesting that it is in this religious section that the lacuna exists. The paper identifies the theoretical foundations for the gateway process in the writings of Isaac Bentov. Isaac Bentov was Israel's first rocketeer, that is, he developed the rocket for the state of Israel. Our own first rocketeer in America, Jack Parsons, was a figure of broad occult interest and significance. Similarly, this Isaac Bentov had very pronounced esoteric interests and pursued those in the United States. His death was conspicuous. It was a plane crash, and indeed, the deadliest plane crash in United States history. He was on a DC-10 which, while taking off, had one of its engines flip up top the wing. This caused a tailspin, which eventually led to a large explosion, killing everyone on board, hundreds of people. Oddly, the checks that had been performed on the plane were stored on the plane, which is not the normal process for this. Because of this, they were destroyed in the resultant fireball. Moreover, the person who had performed these checks committed suicide sometime later, eliminating the only other person who might be able to attest whether the checks had been done successfully or not, and whether there was any meddling involved. Moreover, I would like to point out that this occurred at the Chicago O'Hare Airport, and Chicago was the site of the Max Headroom signal intrusion event, which I have covered in detail in other videos. This city as a locus for illuminated activity is an appealing narrative that seems to gain more detail and traction the deeper we dive into these peculiarities of American history. There is yet another connection with Isaac Bentov, with the Fourth Industrial Revolution. He founded a company, Meditech, which became known as Boston Medical in the year of his death. It pursues, among other things, a technology called neuromodulation, in which brains are directly controlled on an electrical level by implanted technologies. I do not think I need to point out here the devious air that such experiments may have, but I did find his involvement in the gateway process and the thinking underpinning the gateway process to be instructive and very interesting. The document then goes on to describe the gateway process and Robert Monroe himself. Robert Monroe was an interesting figure. He began his life as a hobo. Well, I suppose he began his life as a baby, and then he progressed to being an adolescent, and thereafter a hobo. What are the hobos, you may ask? This was a class of working person in the 30s and 40s who were homeless. They traveled around in boxcars and arrived in cities, worked odd jobs, and then continued on their ways. The hobos are a very interesting culture because they developed their own codes and ways of being quite apart from the mainstream. I hope to cover them in more depth one day in a separate video. After living as a hobo for some time, Robert Monroe settled down and founded the Jefferson Cable Corporation. This was the second 12-channel cable system in the United States at the time and provided television to a broad swath of Virginia. What I didn't realize at the time was that cable distribution actually involves the transmission of extremely powerful electromagnetic waves as well. I had thought that because there was no antenna required for one's house and no satellite dish, that it was in fact a more subtle mode of communication. However, in truth, cable transmission involves the use of much more powerful rays than do traditional antenna televisions. These rays are just sent to a larger antenna, and then networks of cables are snaked out from there to the surrounding houses. In any case, after founding this cable corporation, Monroe experienced a series of out-of-body initiations, and he eventually left his stable job to found a consciousness studies commune, through which he offered a training to allow people to achieve out-of-body experiences themselves. This is the training which the lieutenant colonel in the army attended and is reporting on in this document to his superiors. The most significant and obvious connection that I see to our previously discussed materials here is that this lays a practical groundwork through which that we can understand the methods by which the Max Headroom personality was meant to be beamed into the personalities of the people watching channels 9 and 11 in Chicago in the late 1980s. However, there is something else that caught my eye here as well, and that is that the foundational concept for the gateway process includes the notion that the mind is a hologram. One of the interesting properties of holograms is that the entire information for whatever the hologram is a hologram of is included in each part of the hologram. Therefore, the practice of out-of-body experiences makes most sense within a holographic mind context if we say that the mind is a hologram of the universe, and the universe is a hologram of the mind. So all of the information in the universe is accessible by the mind. If this, then, is taken to be the case, why could someone not see something 1,000 miles away? Why could someone not visit a time in the distant past? If the holograms reflect each other, then anything might be accessible if you only know the right codes. I think that this also underlies a key component of our analysis in general, which is the admission of media into consideration. We took the Videodrome process as being key to understanding what was happening with the Max Headroom mystery. For example, being able to take pointers from media is justified within a context of a mental hologram, because if anything is accessible via the mind, because it is a hologram of the greater world, then the minds of artists might be particularly attuned to what is happening out there. And these come through in expressions of art. So we might say that art bears witness to reality in ways that even the artists themselves might not be aware. This is the theory underpinning the concept in H.P. Lovecraft's writings of Cthulhu's dreams. He says dead Cthulhu lies dreaming in his sunken city of R'lyeh, and artists around the world have nightmares when he turns over in his sleep. The notion that there is a connection between the large secret forces in this world, their movements, and the intuitions of people around the world is well justified and understood within the holographic mind theory because of this peculiar quality of holograms. Perhaps the process of attunement to a language as a baby is, in fact, the universal hologram imprinting itself on the minds of the babies in question. I find this extremely intriguing and will continue thinking about this in the weeks to come. Thank you again, Dayman, for alerting me to this. I will continue to read it and meditate on it as time progresses. It raises a veritable compendium of interesting angles to explore, and I have not by any means exhausted it yet. Well, I believe we have spent long enough on that question, and we must continue on. Patreon subscriber Vicky G asks yet another question. What are your thoughts on the idea of existence as a Loosh energy farm? I was not going to answer these two questions from the same person at first, but then I did just a little research because I could not resist learning what the term Loosh meant, and I was shocked to discover that it is actually a piece of jargon from the writings of none other than Robert Monroe, the person about whom we have just been speaking. And so, in honor of Robert Monroe, and to further expand on the last question, I decided to answer this one. I have not actually read the book Far Journeys by Robert Monroe, from which this term is taken. However, according to the summaries that I have read, the notion of a Loosh energy farm is that severe emotions, whether joyous or negative, are harvested from humanity and taken elsewhere to be feasted on by some sort of alien race. To me, the question here is whether or not illuminated moves through society have guided us toward the extremes of emotion, or have cultivated in us some ability to access more wild and severe emotions than we would naturally. And for me, that answer is a no. In general, to me, it seems that the illuminated control from above is one of deadening and not one of excitement. Looking at the large organs of control that the illuminated masters have used, in particular, I'm thinking of ancient Rome. We have a prevalence of a philosophy known as Stoicism, and Stoicism is anything except excitatory. In general, I do not believe that the Illuminati is in the business of whipping us up, but tends more toward the business of tamping us down and not allowing us to access the full range of our emotions. The major exception that I can think of here is social media, which is a bit of a Loosh farm in of itself, in that the outrage which it cultivates and promotes is used to fuel advertisements by getting your clicks. I think that the Loosh farm is a useful way of thinking of these systems that get us all whipped up and direct that energy toward their own pocketbooks. But the generally depressing, dampening nature of the state leads me to believe that society writ large and culture is not actually functioning in the way that Robert Monroe suggests in his elaboration of this term. Thank you, though, Vicky, for your question, and I look forward to hearing more from you. Our next question is from Patreon subscriber Athena Reddy. Miss Reddy asks, I recently moved to a town near an army base, and I was driving my car down a pretty road that abruptly ended and said restricted area. As I turned around near the sign to go back the other way, my car's bumper felt like it hit something. But 1, there was no curb. 2, where the street met the grass was a few feet off. What it felt like was being propelled away from the site, as if a bumper car, aka Dodgems, had pushed me. I've been mystified for a week. Any thoughts? The first thing that this brings to mind is a legend from San Antonio, Texas. There is a place in this city where a road intersects a train track. The legend has it that a bus full of school children was stopped on this, and that a train approached. It was unable to brake fast enough to avoid the bus, and slammed into it, killing several children instantly. Now it is said that if you go to that crossing, park your car, then a series of ghostly handprints will appear on the back of your car, pushing it off of the tracks. The second thing that this brings to mind is something called foundational sacrifice. This is a very broad cultural practice in which a person is killed in the laying of the foundation of a house in order for that house to then have a guardian spirit. I wonder if the base that you are near, and whatever restricted zone you have been approaching, might not have such a guardian. If anybody has any more information regarding this, I would encourage you to chime in, because this experience sounds very mysterious to me, and I should like to hear if there are any others like it. Thank you very much, and now we move on to our final question of the evening. Warata Blossoms in My Lap 156 asks, here's my question. How do you feel about the Lil Nas X video for Montero? People seem to be upset that the devil appears at all. Maybe they're upset at the lap dance the artist gives to the devil. But it seems like the harsh critiques seem to be ignoring the fact that Lil Nas X actually kills the devil. I'm curious about your read on the video, and wondering why depictions of going to hell are such an uproarious trigger for so many. Thank you for your question, Warata. For viewers who may be unfamiliar with the video, I will briefly describe its contents. It takes place in 3 acts, the first of which has Lil Nas X as a sort of Adam figure in an Adam and Eve-like garden. However, instead of Eve, he is having a sexual relationship with a snake creature, which has ties to the Lilith of legend. These things seem to be going quite well for him, but then we are taken to a sort of Roman Colosseum type scenario where he is being judged, perhaps for his crimes with the snake creature. An attendee throws a stone which hits him in the head and knocks him out. His soul ascends to heaven, where he sees a mysterious angel. Before he is able to enter the pearly gates, a spear hurled up from the depths comes upward. He grabs onto it and slides down it. He lands in hell, wearing a carnelian stone. I believe this is significant because carnelian is in fact one of the 12 foundational stones of the New Jerusalem, that is the city of heaven, that are enumerated in Revelation 21. Lil Nas continues into the palace of Satan, where he then performs a lap dance on Satan, kills him, and takes his crown. While I agree with you, Warata, that it is next to impossible that this should be interpreted as devil worship, since in fact it does have to do with killing the devil, one must wonder what the conservative commentators are getting at. What part of this video is meant to be devil worship? I believe that the only possible answer is that it's meant to be the lap dance that Lil Nas gives to the devil. The notion that a lap dance should be a form of worship is very peculiar. We have a similar sort of dance described in the Bible as the dance of Salome, for which she also gets a head on a plate. However, this is clearly within a very different tradition, because the head that Salome requests is that of John the Baptist, i.e., a character on the side of the author of the book. Here we have the head of Satan being taken, or at least taken metaphorically in the taking of his crown and the destruction of his body. This insistence that the lap dance of the devil is worship brings to mind the recent scandal surrounding the Jerry Falwell III, whose business supported strip clubs and who was mentioned as having certain illicit photos taken of himself in a sexualized nightclub. Have the conservative Southern preachers shown their hand Does this indicate that there is some sort of form of worship which they engage in, which requires lap dance and other sexualized forms of dance performed by the worshipping party on the worshipped? Are these preachers actually setting themselves up as false prophets, so blinded by their own power that they don't realize that they are revealing their hands to us in suggesting that a lap dance is actually a form of worship? Perhaps. In what context have they received this information that a lap dance is a form of worship? It is certainly nothing ever prescribed in the Bible. We shall keep an eye on this strange new development. But for now, these are all the questions that we will answer this week. I would like to thank you for attending this office hours and encourage you to write your own questions below. The ideal question, in my mind, is one based on your experience and your noticings of the world around you. Not an idea that we can see discussed elsewhere, but new ground for us to tread. Thank you for your curiosity and your continued patronage of this channel. If you wish for a closer line or to support these researches, please find us on www.patreon.com/bulwer. I shall look for you there. And until next time, may you bask in the sun of wisdom, just like our reptile overlords.